The story is they're
I'm not
satellites and
asking
they're
him to.
using time dilation to fit. The story is they're satellites in space and they're using time dilation to keep their times correct. Witsit doesn't have to believe none of the shit about satellites in order to give the
I'm
narrative
not
of what they're
asking him
doing
to.
with the satellites.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say before. Wasn't this originally about the corrections, the relativistic corrections, not really about whether satellites exist? Because it's the claims that they're making and how it fits into their model originally that was brought up.
Yeah, and a really simple
the time
definition of satellite is a smaller object moving around a larger object. So
What do they
That
cite
orbits
as
another object. A satellite, like an object that orbits another object. Yeah.
yeah, okay,
Yeah.
yeah, I think that there are satellites orbiting above the Earth.
We just disagree as to how high they are above the Earth.
That's correct. Yes. Yeah. And I think that even the people that believe they're a certain distance wouldn't even know, because they make the assumption that they're in a vacuum and then they take radio transmissions. And so then you use obviously speed equals distance over time. You use the assumed constancy of light, which we know is not true, has been disproven. So that's their first error. And then they use their assumed distant. Well, they have their time. So the time's not necessarily assumed. You would get in a certain time. They use their assumed speed, and they use that c because they're assuming a vacuum, right? So the speed of light being constant in a vacuum, which is multiple assumptions in one. And that's how they're getting their distance. So if it was a different medium, say it was much more dense, then the object could be sending you signals. It could be way closer than you think it is. You're assuming it's in a vacuum. You're assuming speed is constant, and it's the speed of light in a vacuum. And then you're getting your distance that way. You're deriving your distance. So further, what I've found out is every time I look into satellites further, they end up destroying the mainstream model, which is why I'm very open to something being up there, because in order to even make them work in their own paradigm, they have to use geocentric physics. They have to use all kinds of corrections that refute relativity. So,
Yo, real quick, bro. With that being said, since the speed of light is not constant and relative, you said that there's a preferred direction, right, in the north. Is there an opposite preferred direction in the south? Because I heard that there was 2 experiments done in the south with interferometry showing that the speed of light actually flips in the south. Is that true?
so
this is very relevant.
No, it is, but yeah. So the evidence of that's super scarce. So like, I just reserve any judgment on that. There's like thousands of tests that have been done in the north, and basically nothing below the equator. There's like
2.
Yeah, and it's like super hard to verify, and yeah, it's not reliable. So I'm open to it, but there's just like a huge lack of evidence. My position is so solid in the north, like that's why it's my position. There's such an abundance of evidence and replication, and there's just nothing anywhere close to that in the south. So you would think there'd be way more than 2, you know. So I don't know. Maybe.
I think they're trying to hide that though, because if that would debunk relativity, dude. Like, if we need more experiments in the south, because that would be very significant.
Yeah, and even
the fact that it's already relative is huge.
Even what they do, even when it does in the north, because this is what's so crazy though. You see, it works so perfect because everybody thinks what this guy thinks. It's just not true at all. It's like if you go read their own papers, it doesn't say that at all. It says that it doesn't work, but no one does that. Who does that? Who goes and reads like satellite white papers and like research papers from universities that went and pulled the raw data from satellites and found it was already set net corrected based on the anisotropic assumption? Like, who does that? No, like not many people. We do, right? And so even though they could actually utilize a technology that refutes heliocentrism and refutes relativity every day, all day, tell the masses that it works perfectly within that paradigm, and then they would never know. And that's where we're at right now. That's what I think. I'm very open to satellites. I don't think there's necessarily as many as they say. I don't think they're as far away as they say. I don't think a lot of the stuff they claim are satellites actually are. I think that there are some satellites in the sky. And yeah, I just think they lie about them because no one knows anything about it.
Do you mind explaining why there might be a preferred direction? Like what's causing it regarding the ether drag? Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah. So it's like the simplest analogy is if you're like swimming in a river, or say a stream, if you're swimming with the stream, then you go faster. than if you swim across the stream or against the current. So now I don't think light actually travels; it just appears to travel. So it has a rate of induction, but we'll just set that aside. It doesn't matter. It appears to travel, so we measure it with the speed. And when it goes in a specific direction, it goes faster. And so, yeah, I think basically there is like the current would be the ether drift. There's a giant vortex in the ether. And when the light moves in the direction of that motion, it propagates faster, quote unquote, propagates. So, I mean, and by the way, bro, this is like well-known thing of physics. This is what created Airy's failure in Michelson-Morley. And that's why they were so proud of the idea, because they were like, dude, this is going to be definitive. There's no way around it. Because all throughout the 1800s, they did tests that showed like, okay, if you have some water and the water's moving, the light will move at its speed plus the speed the water's moving, c plus v. And they proved that a dozen different times. And so they used that knowledge to then set up one with an ether. So like this is not even disputed. Basically, the mainstream just claims it's different when it's in a vacuum. All of a sudden, the light doesn't move c plus v based on the medium because there is no medium. Trust me, bro. You know, because like even a 5-year-old can understand that if you swim with the river, you're going to be able to go faster than if you swim against it. And that's really how simple this whole thing about light being anisotropic is. C plus V. V is the velocity of the medium.
I think it has to have a preferred direction if it's energy, because how else would it be moving? And that's what energy is movement. So the preferred direction would be the flow, right? The current, the ether flow, or the current, the medium flow, whatever direction the medium is going, whatever flow, direction the energy is going, that would be the current. So if you talk in electrical terms, that makes sense, right? And then you have resistance. You have things that capacitors that would store that energy along the way and release it. But all that makes sense, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I'm not trying to start a riot in here, bro, but I do want to bring up Coriolis as possibly being an actual force, not a fictitious or pseudo force. And I understand the whole perspective thing and inertial frame of reference versus non-inertial. But in our model, not that we have a complete model, but in a geostationary fixed planar Earth, right? You think maybe that there's some forces being transferred to the the clouds, the atmos, that's causing hurricanes and storms and jet streams, and underneath the water there's currents that seem to be also following this preferred direction? Or
yeah, I mean, you added a lot to it. It may have a direct effect on those things, but if I set that aside, I think there is a real force of Coriolis, specifically that there's a vortex that spins over top of the Earth, and it's similar to the Machian principle, right? Which is that if you had a stationary Earth and the whole universe moving around it, that would create a force. Yeah. So I think that would have to happen, but I also think it's not near as strong as they say, though.
Right. It's a little. Yeah, I get it, dude.
You can prove that the Coriolis effect, right, is a true force, like on a spinning object. But that's not what they're fighting for. They're fighting for a Coriolis optical effect that happens due to perspective or your visual, like where you're viewing it from, what reference frame you're viewing it for. That's totally different.
Well, what he's saying though is that he thinks there's a real one on the Earth, meaning so they claim that the Earth is spinning and that there's an optical effect, basically a fictitious force that occurs based on reference frame. And what he's saying is he thinks that there's a stationary Earth, but there's a real Coriolis force because the sky is spinning and it translates motion down to the Earth, and it can affect phenomena like weather and stuff.
Yes, sir.
That would be tougher to prove than their Coriolis, I think. Like, it's a tough.
No, we have interferometry. We have interferometry showing that that's the case. No, because this is a thing that it's like I've tried to defend the idea that maybe the Coriolis isn't fictitious after all in our model, that there actually is forces being translated to the surface of the Earth because of the spinning of the sky.
I think so. I just don't think it's anywhere close to how strong they say. But what else is a piece of evidence that supports that is the Elias effect. So like if you have say, so if there's an actual force coming down from the sky, which there's tons of EM coming from the sky at all times. So if the sky is spinning, one would logically assume that that EM coming down has a slight preference in direction. It's moving to the side slightly as it comes down, because the whole sky is spinning. It's basically, it's given, like, it started off and comes down from something that's spinning. But like, if you think about, like, if you think about a pendulum, right, and it's processing, if there's an eclipse and it all of a sudden changes, like what the pendulum's doing changes, that makes perfect sense in what we're discussing, which is that the only thing that could be affecting it at all is coming from the sky. That's why when stuff happens in the sky, it changes. Same thing with interferometry. The interferometry changes based on where the sun is. It literally changes perfectly in correlation to solar motion. So like the periodicity of the sun. So the equinoxes have the highest and lowest magnitudes of fringe shift, for example. And Dayton Miller proved this, and then people subsequently verified it. So it's like what's going on in the sky does have an effect on the Earth, and it actually makes light, quote unquote, go faster based on where you are and what time of year it is and what direction the light's going, which is insane. And is an absolute death blow to what they told us that we live on. We absolutely cannot live on a spinning ball that's orbiting, right? That those two things cannot both be true.
Wouldn't positioning be able to be determined because of this? If the speed is constant, but the distance is different, that would mean you would be able to dictate what longitude and latitude you're at due to that, right? Like they say we do.
Well, okay, this is where I started to tap out, because I think the effect is way weaker when it's on material objects, right? So like it makes way more sense to me that the light, the anisotropic, which just means preferred direction, the anisotropic nature of light would be much more easily detected than a physical object, because, well, look at light, it's like insanely fast, quote unquote. It doesn't actually travel. And so light is just the background itself, in my opinion. It gets excited, and we can see into it for a second. We see a glimpse into the major ocean that is the ether or whatever. So like light is the medium. If the medium's moving, and then whenever it gets excited, it lights up, and then we see how quick it lights up, and we call it speed. Well, if the light is the ether, is the background, and it's moving, then of course it's going to light up faster in the direction it's moving already. Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's how I view it. But when it comes to like a material object and like say different latitudes with the pendulum and knowing exactly where you are, now we're leaping to the claim that this because it'd be an actual real Coriolis force coming from the sky is so strong that it's detectable in material objects. And to me, I can present a mechanism that would mean it could affect material objects, but it would be really weak, as far as I know. And it's like there's a medium connecting the sky to the ground. There's the ether. There's also an additional medium as you come down, right? We live in a medium called air. So, but even in a vacuum, there's a medium connecting it. So it's similar to like how you could, if you waved your hand over a bathtub, the water will move, because the motion is transferred through the medium of air to the water. I think the same thing would happen from the sky to the ground. I think it would affect the pendulum possibly and slightly, but it would be super hard to detect. It would be really, really, really small.
That's why I think if you start a pendulum in the wrong direction, it'll continue in that wrong direction. But if you stop. But if you start it in the direction that the air is moving, or the ether, or whatever you want to call it, that flow, then that friction caused by that flow and that moving object through the medium will make it process at a certain rate, right? Like that makes sense to me.
Yeah, so not only is the claim that the precession of the pendulum fallacious, because it's just affirming the consequent and assuming the cause at the jump, right? Which is that the Earth's spin causes it. If the Earth is a spinning ball, then this would happen. This happens, therefore the Earth is a spinning ball. It's just fallacious. It's begging the question. It's a reification fallacy. It's affirming the consequent. But even beyond that, we have a better explanation than they do. So that's the funniest part, and that's basically how this whole conversation goes. So
I think there's a big issue with this pendulum thing, because I think they can't even show it processing, quote unquote, on the first try, right? So I don't even believe in the claim that it processes the way they say. So I'm like double negative on this one.
Oh yeah,
Well,
maybe not. Maybe not. I'm open to it. No, I'm open because it's almost impossible to not impart lateral bias on a pendulum. And everyone that's actually done it in real life, and it's so funny. It's always just the random anonymous globers that come in and say, "I've done it. It worked perfect." No, it didn't. No, it didn't. Because I know tons of people that have done it, even people that have done it with a university, and it's like incredibly hard, and they have to do it multiple times, and they rarely
That's
ever
right.
get it to be perfect because it's so sensitive and so subject to error. And that makes perfect sense with my explanation because I think I think there may be an effect, but it's so incredibly small, dude. Good luck trying not to outweigh it with lateral
Yeah.
bias.
And you would have interference too. Like you would have, if things are affecting it, like you would have so much interference with just all the electromagnetic stuff, everything that is involved in our medium. And what you said about light being medium, I think light is a part of the medium. But with everything that affects it, you would have so much interference, and interference going along with the electrical stuff, it makes sense, right? Like,
I want to jump in because Witsit was saying like the idea of like a bathtub, and then like I just wanted to like say this analogy real quick. If you had like a rubber ducky floating in a bathtub, and you put your hand above the water, and you just start making swirling, like you're just going clockwise, you're just swirling, but let's say your hand's about 5-10 inches above the water, and you're just swirling and swirling. Well, there would be some transfer from the air of that your hand, the air. Now, I'm not saying that the ether drift is just airflow. I'm not necessarily saying that. I'm just using the analogy that if you were to do that, above the rubber ducky, it probably would get the rubber ducky to move very minimally. You might get the rubber ducky going clockwise very slowly, even though your hand might be going really fast. You might be going, really fast with your hand, but only the little bit of air in this analogy, I'm kind of using the air, I guess, that's transferring to that actual rubber ducky, as it were, that would be just moving very slowly.
and it depends on the position of the duck, which way it would move, whether it move left to right or right to left, or spin around in a single position in a certain position of the vortex, right?
Yeah,
like if you see a flowing river go by a rock and it creates a vortex, like near the rock, you get stuck, right? The kayak gets stuck or the duck gets stuck. But if you move it off to the side a little bit, it'll go in one direction, or often to the left or off to the right, or go straight.
Yeah, there would be other factors that could affect it. But I was just going to say, because the thing is about the sidereal motion is that, they claim the Earth is rotating at, the 1,000 miles an hour kind of thing. So I was going to ask Witsit, like, so if the stars are moving at a roughly 1,000 miles an hour, the sun/stars, they're only 4 minutes different, the sidereal versus the solar day. So let's say the sun at the equator is going 1,000 miles an hour. Do you think the ether drift is going 1,000 miles an hour?
I have no idea.
Is it going the same speed as the stars? Like, 1,000 miles an hour? Whizzing across the surface?
Good question. I wouldn't even stamp the 1,000, right? Because obviously the tangential velocity is dependent upon how big the rotation is. So I think the sky's moving way faster than 1,000 miles per hour. You know what I'm saying? Because like the tangential velocity of 1,000 miles per hour is based on a circumference of a globe of 24,901, specifically the circumference at the equator. And now if it's the sky spinning, it's a way bigger circumference, So for example, like super distant stars would have to be moving. And I don't know how far super distant is, but even if they're just thousands and thousands and thousands of miles, they're moving super fast.
Your circumference could be as big as you want and keep the same speed.
No, angular speed.
The same rim velocity. So in that sense, it can be as small or as big as you want to make it.
Okay, well, you can keep the same angular velocity, right? But as you increase the radius, you increase tangential velocity. That's why on the globe, it's like 700 in the north and then 1,000 at the equator, right? But it's all going 15 degrees per hour.
And then they go 700 back in the south, whereas on a layout, like a planar layout that comes out from the center that would have wider and wider radiuses, obviously the ground speed would increase considerably.
So the sun would be going much faster in the south. So I don't say a speed. I have no idea what the speed is. I wouldn't be surprised at all if the sky is really big and like as in the stuff in it is still really big. It's just not the kind of big that they say. And it's still pretty far away. Like if the stars are like thousands of miles away, like that's super far away. You know, like I don't know how big they are, what they are, how fast they're going, but I certainly am open to this gigantic like machine moving around us. You know, like that makes a lot of sense and it would generate a lot of power. And then what would happen is as it moves, all you would need is something to start it because once it starts, it'll go forever. Because what'll happen is it'll generate all this angular momentum. Like it's so massive, it's generating all this angular momentum. And then you're going to have centrifugal force as it spins, but then you're going to have an inward force that's generated by the spin at the angle. And the inward force is going to be slightly more, actually like almost twice as much as the outward force. And so it basically does this little seesaw balancing thing where it always has a net inward bias. So it keeps on its path around you. So in theory, you could have the sky moving around a stationary Earth forever because something started it. Also, you could have it just very slowing down at a very slow rate. And so maybe eventually it would stop in theory. I go with the first one personally.
The first one can work because according to the laws of physics, we know because that's perpetual motion. But the second one, sure, maybe.
Wow.
And this kind of comes back to the mocking principle. It can link into the mocking principle as well in terms of how that is actually transferred.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, specifically, Essie, you're right. But imagine if it's like so majestically created that the loss is like as close to nothing as you can get. Like for intents and purposes, that thing's just going to move forever. You know, like sure, but like I said, in theory, according to our understanding of natural law, it would slow down.
Or like what the precession of the equinoxes, maybe would it slow down in a very 26,000 year cycle that is very, very, very minimal, but has significance over time. Because there does seem to be that slight sync difference between the sidereal and the solar day.
Yeah, and actually now that is actually more my position because when you think about it, it's like this place was actually created for a time. It wasn't created eternally. I don't know. I know that might not resonate with everyone, but yeah, it would also explain stuff like that, like precessions of all of the bodies. And dude, just think about this giant machine moving around us. Like logically, wouldn't that have some effects on us, like on where we live? Like if that giant machine's moving over top of us and around us, like it's totally logical that motion would translate down to the earth at varying degrees.
Yeah, that's why I was using, which I know it's kind of a crude analogy, but the idea of like a bathtub with a little rubber ducky in there, and then you're like swiping your hand above it, where you're going to get the things that are, you're not touching it, you're not touching the little rubber ducky thing, you're not, but now in that case, it's a transfer of air, so it's kind of, that is kind of a simple explanation. Oh, you're moving the air, and then the air is going to start moving the thing below it, but it's not going to transfer exactly because of the amount of loss that is, between the amount of air your hand is moving by the time it actually impacts the rubber ducky thing. There's going to be that minimal actual transfer at that level, but at the same time, whatever is occurring with the motion of the sky, it would make sense that it would have some effect on the air, of course, as well. But I'm not really trying to make that direct link, although that would be a link with weather, if there's a way in which the magnetic fields and everything are moving in that way that would affect it. But nonetheless, just having a motion within a medium that's connected to a sky that we are also within would make sense that it would be connected.
So real quick, medium is the key word here, right? By which the transfer of energy occurs. Yeah, that's the very essence of this whole thing.
I just want to say, because the rebuttal from the Globers is, well, how come the hurricanes spin in the opposite way as the sky in the north, right? Because they spin counterclockwise, and then the pendulum seems to spin clockwise. And I have my own ideas, and it has to do with the deflection, how the deflection works. Because
pendulum doesn't swing, bro. You got to understand that's a misconception, right?
I know.
The pendulum goes back and forth, bro.
It processes. It goes back and forth and then processes around the pit or whatever.
Not according to the claim. Not according to the claim, guys. I'm sorry.
Well,
I
they
know
say
what
the
you're
Earth
saying.
is rotating under it, but we're talking about what it actually does. I think, I think that's what
Right.
Lion's saying.
Yeah, in their model,
okay,
it's just
okay.
going back and forth. It's not actually like I get it, dude. I get it. It's all due to perspective and inertial reference frames. It's all, but I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about in our model, right? What's going on? And I think that the way that, like, somebody mentioned it a couple weeks ago, if the sun were to travel from east to west, right, and leave a wake in its path, that wake is then acting upon the surface, right, of the earth, the atmos, and then in turn it's acting on the hurricanes, right? So by the time you get the translation of force, you have deflections that cause opposite direction of spin. You get what I'm saying? So if the sun's
I
going
hear
from
you,
east
but
to west and it's leaving a wake, it's gonna
are
make
you
it's
saying
gonna
that's affecting the pendulum, though?
no. I'm saying that the way that the forces are translated could affect the rotation. And just because you have an opposite rotation doesn't mean that there isn't ether drag.
Bro, if it's kinetic energy rotation, there has to be a medium of transfer, right? We agree on that.
Right. But
So what's
the
the
best way
medium
to
of transfer to causing the pendulum to quote unquote process?
the ether, bro. We've been talking about it. But hold on. So the way I can describe it is if you have a pool, right, and you put your hand through the pool, you'll end up making like little vortices behind your hand, and you'll notice the vortices spinning in the opposite direction of your hand.
Yeah,
Because they're
I've
causing
got
the
a little.
wind.
I have a little GIF, a little simple little thing there. Yeah, that like, and I've mentioned like if you drag like a paddle through water and it creates the clockwise and counterclockwise. So, Lion, are you saying
Right.
that are you saying the whole thing would be? Are you suggesting the idea that the whole thing would be going like clockwise from above, the whole ether vortex, but that the sun and its impact would then create within that the clockwise and counterclockwise from the equator, north and south effect?
It's a possibility. I'm not making any positive claims, but it's something to entertain. And who knows? There could actually be an actual axis of rotation in the south that's spinning the opposite way. 4 axes in the south that are spinning the opposite way, according to the quadrupole model. But that's just different possibilities that we need to entertain to try to explain what the hell is going on in our reality. That's all, dude.
According to the what model?
The quadrupole.
You're saying that would, yeah, split into like 4 vortices that would be split.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now we haven't had enough interferometry experiments done in the south to actually corroborate that you might actually have an opposite axis of rotation. But if there was, we need more experiments.
But they say the pendulum does precess the opposite way in the south versus the north, and then the hurricanes claim.
Yeah. But interferometry should not in their paradigm. So it appears
It
that
doesn't process
Right.
in
the guy
the
who came
equator,
up with
right?
it, the guy who came up with it, I remember something happened to him. I don't remember what it was, but like, yeah, something happened to that guy. Like, he started losing funding or something.
Yo,
Don't they
I
also
have a
say the
question.
pendulum does not process in the equator?
Yep. Which is
I have a-
interesting when I'm just trying to get in. I was gonna post this image. It's interesting just when you look at these this hurricane data. I'll post these that show that you guys have probably seen these. I mean, this is the claim. That's all tropical storms from 1848 to 2013. That's claiming, but you see how there's like none in the middle band. It's kind of interesting, like
Yep.
basically where the sun travels, and it's like they're only north and south. Which, if these patterns are related to the way the pendulum functions in some way, then that could imply that idea. Although would need to be verified for sure, but just that idea that there's a neutral zone there in the middle.
Yeah, that's interesting, bro. I didn't know that. That's quite interesting. So there's no hurricane activity in that area at all.
In the middle, yeah, in the center. And then look to this, yeah, kind of a separate thing, but in terms of the AE map, look at how much weaker the ones in the south are and how much stronger the ones in the north are. If you're on like the inner, tighter circle of the inner, and there's a lot more heat, a lot more, the vortex is more intense, the center of the vortex, versus on the outer, which would tend to dissipate and, dilute more because it's outer, is just interesting to say the least, how much stronger they are in the north and weaker in the south, as kind of another correlation to the AE type of or Gleason's type of layout.
Wouldn't
it's
that
like
band in the middle be the hottest spot? Would you say that would be the hottest area?
Yeah, the equator. I mean, there would be other factors, but overall, the
So that would
equatorial
make
region.
sense in a way, because I was trying to make sense of it, that it's a differential, right? Heat and cold. So that would make sense. It would happen where the boundary of heat and cold is. Okay. Wow, that's freaking neat, that map.
Dude, there's so much more in the north. That's crazy.
Could it be because of the cold? It's colder in the north? But no, it gets cold in the south as well, right? So that doesn't make sense.
That's what I was saying, that pattern kind of fits the idea. Like if you just take a vortex in water, you spin it. It's like in the middle, it's going to be moving a lot faster and be a lot more kind of aggressive, whereas the outside starts to be dissipating, outwards. It's kind of weaker in the outer than it is in the center. In some cases, I mean, it depends on kind of the type of vortex, but yeah, so just that is interesting as well. But I can't believe no one's done a pendulum at the equator. It's like unbelievable. Like we're in 2024 and there's no evidence of it. It's pretty shocking.
Yeah, like I'm telling you, I don't believe in the pendulum thing. Why do you have to do something multiple times if it's a claim that it could tell you where you're at? Why do you have to do it 5 times? That doesn't make sense.
I still remember being in here a long time ago, and I remember I was driving to get raw milk. And I just randomly asked Zanuck that. It's like it just popped in my head. And then I found out, wait, there must be nothing. Zanuck he's freaking out right now. And so then come to find out, yeah, there's like literally nothing. Like they don't even have a claim about it.
There is no answer, bro.
We have Glober employees, they would find it if it existed.
Look, if you have a GPS and it works 1 out of 5 times, you're going to throw it away, right?
Yeah, but the only thing I guess, like Essie, if we had our own pendulum setups and we were had a group, we're traveling around the world, north, south, equator, all over, and we're testing it. I mean, that's what would really be needed to do it independently, ideally, and to really nail it down to the best of our abilities. Because I hear what you're saying. I mean, it does seem like, at the very least, it's fairly flimsy, in terms of getting the effect. Let's just say it is an effect, because obviously there would be other factors that would be involved. Like it would be, it is a very subtle effect, but yeah, there would just have to be a lot of like controls and repeating to validate it. And if it's, if it's not, then it's not. But if it is, then it is. I mean, I have my own thoughts on it, but I mean,
I'm with you, Gio. If somebody could show me that it works, I'll say, yeah, look, I mean, every time they do it, it processes by this amount. Wow. And then I'll say, okay, why? But I'm not even at this point convinced that it works. But if somebody could show me it working every time, I'll be dumb. I'll be really dumb not to believe it. But so far, they have to do it 4, 5, 6 times. Why?
Yeah. Well, what if it's a type of thing though that's just very, very sensitive? To where it has to, like, if the effect is so subtle that you would have to do it enough times, like, to get it right. Like, I don't know, if you did it 30 times and it processed half of the times, or 20 out of the 30, would that be compelling?
Not really, no. Because it
yeah.
For me, right, if you make a claim that this thing tells you what latitude you're on and it works 1 out of 5 times, well, I mean, I'm sorry. I mean,
well, just imagine this though. Well, let's say you have an environment that's completely sealed. It's all like for doing the pendulum. There's nothing else. There's no electromagnetic, all of that. But you just put a fan really low, like a really low, a slow turning fan that's just very gently blowing a teeny bit of air. And then you wanted to try to see if you could, have the pendulum process due to the little bit of air from the fan. Wouldn't it? I mean, it would make sense that like it would be tricky to get it, going to where the air is affecting it versus something else that you impacted, that you blew, that's something else that you set it off in a funny way, or that something else affected it, to get the effect of the actual wind that would be pushing it. the little bit of error.
That's kind of convincing, but not really. Like, I would have to see it work every single time. Like, if the claim is this, like, I wouldn't want a compass that sometimes worked, right? So I don't know. Like, I guess
Well,
I'm very hard on this one.
That's where interferometry comes in, because they've literally done hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of experiments in the north. And yeah, there's a preferred direction of light. Like, there's no doubt about it, bro. Like, it spins clockwise, or the preferred direction is clockwise.
You need such a controlled environment for the pendulum. I mean, yeah, like Gio said, you got a little fan. Like, what area are they doing this in where there's no ventilation system? You're doing it in stairwells. People are opening doors and shit. Like I don't know. I just feel like you'd have to do it in a completely sealed room. Make sure all you're using the same mechanism to attach it to the wall. The gimbal or whatever it swings by. The same setup every time. Like, you do it until you get it right, and then that's how you do it. You know what I'm saying? Like, yeah, I don't know why you would have to do it 5 times. Like, we know how to do it right. You can't just do it right.
Exactly my point. Exactly that. And they do have the release. They have a cord. They burn it, right? They say they can control it, and but then, okay, if you can, then why does it not work every single time? Exactly.
Have they done it in a vacuum?
It should. I mean, if it's a effect, well, hold on. Does someone want to answer what Line said? Yeah, that's a good question. Has anyone done a Foucault's pendulum in a vacuum?
Yeah, they sell some that are in a vacuum.
That'd be the best place to do it in.
Well, one thing I was going to say about the fact that the ones that, I mean, this is, okay, there's two, let's just say, just looking at all options, there's 2 reasons why they use, electronically controlled ones in museums. The one, you could say because it's not an effect at all, and they're just faking the whole thing. But the other reason, let's say it is an effect, but it's a very mild, subtle effect that can get thrown off by a lot of things, then they can't really have one in a museum that's real, because people are going to be blowing air and laughing and coughing and all kinds of stuff that might affect it. Plus, it's not going to swing all day. It's not going to swing for the 12 hours that the museum's open for people to come look at it. So, but I'm just saying, from the perspective that it's all fake, of course they have to just, control it with motors. But from the perspective that it is a real effect, but it's very subtle and hard to get right, that would be another reason why they said, forget it. Just put motors and magnets and just, make a display for people to come and point at and go, oh, look, the Earth is rotating because this pendulum is convincing me it is.
We went over.
Right, so specifically, I think it is that the effect is not very strong at all, and it changes. See, on the globe, it should never change. It's just based on latitude. It should always be the same. So if it's the effect actually changes, then of course you're never going to be able to get it right the first time. You're going to have to mess with it, adjust it, and all this stuff. Of course you're going to have to guide it. But it's because they think the Earth itself is spinning, causing it, and so it's just based on latitude, which again is unchanging. But if it's actually the sky moving, well, the sky is always changing. Like, there's always stuff moving in and out. Like, for example, the Anolemas, the precession of stars. Like, there is movement in the sky. Specifically, let's just stick with the sun. So the effect itself would change, and it would be very small. And that's exactly, now if you had a group of people that were trying to prove it's actually pretty strong and always happens the same, but it's actually weak and changes based on the sky, then we would basically get exactly what we have right now, which is a bunch of like inconsistent, repetitive attempts. It's too sensitive, and then it's guided with EM. Because it's always changing and it's super weak, and you're trying to lie about what it actually is.
It's the same as the drop rate, right? That thing they have in the UK where they're dropping these little tiny balls or whatever, and depending on the atmospheric conditions, the rate will change. It's all connected to those base principles.
I think this Foucault pendulum thing is way more off than the dropping. Like, they claim when you drop something, it's only off by the teeniest, tiniest of amounts. But this Foucault pendulum thing, like, it's off. Like, like a normal person can't measure the amount that it's off when you drop something, but you can see it in this pendulum.
Yeah, I think the reason it would be more obviously expressed is because it's a rotational thing, right? So the delta is going to be more obvious than like a minor change in, because the medium doesn't change, right? When those balls drop, the medium's not
Well,
changing. It's just the atmospheric conditions. So the change in the drop rate is gonna be limited to how much it can change. But something that's rotating, that could be a lot bigger delta.
it's a very weak force because even in interferometry, bro, like how much fringe shift are we talking about, dude?
Yeah, like not, and just a fringe shift is an insanely small, precise measurement.
But it's still there. There's still a bias. So even if, okay, let's say the focal pendulum is legit precessing, so what? Doesn't mean that the Earth is moving. It's just that the sky is moving. That's all I'm trying to say, guys. And sometimes we got to be more open-minded about these experiments, right? And not just disregard it altogether. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah. So something I wanted to say when you brought that up first timeline is, to me, that preferred direction that you and Witsit were talking about, it kind of indicates a potential reason for why it is. So because you can say the same thing, like the weakness of it that Witsit pointed out. You could say the same thing about the downward bias, right? It's not as if it's super powerful that we can't overcome it. Just get up on a ladder, whatever, right? So it's more to have a certain order about how the whole structure of creation works, right? And the weakness of it is intentional, because otherwise it would just cause way too much havoc. But to have it enough to have this preferred direction of how the different weather events happen, I would suggest that the purpose of that is to have a circulation. It would just make sense to have a nice subtle circulation so you don't have a stagnant system with respect to weather inside. That makes sense?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. But all I'm saying, and if you consider the surface area, right? Because that force, when you combine it over a large surface area like the whole North, then you might actually see like compounding effects, right?
Yeah, especially in a dynamic system.
Yeah, in a dynamic system, that little bias, right, over a 1.1 or like a square foot area, right, and you add that little bias over millions and millions of miles, or not millions, but thousands of miles, you might have an effect, like the
Hey, let me put this into perspective for everyone, okay? Dayton Miller replicated Michelson-Morley, and he said that the precision was such that it was to 1/100,000th of a wavelength. Okay, well, what wavelength? And Michelson-Morley, I believe, used like 589 nanometers wavelength. And so a nanometer is like 1/1000th of a meter. 1/1000th of a meter. So 589 nanometers. Specific wavelength is like yellow light. They use light beams. And the replication that Dayton did had the precision down to 1/100,000th of a wavelength. So 1/100,000th of 589 nanometers, which is 1/1000th a meter, times 589, obviously. So 1/100,000th of 589 times 1 in a billion. So we're talking about mind-blowingly precise measurements. Okay, so it's measuring an effect that shouldn't be there, and it's a reliable, precise measurement. Again, the error margin goes all the way down to 1/100,000th of a wavelength. And so it's very damning, but it isn't very big. And so to think we could just throw something on a string and just consistently measure this great effect is wildly unattached from that observation.
Yeah, the way they tried to justify it and go about it, like the pendulum is the wrong way to go about it. It doesn't make any sense to use something that mechanically imprecise to try and get to measure what you're talking about. And then on top of that, that's not even the reason they do it. They're doing it to try and justify a lie. But if you think about, I want to maybe like see what your thoughts are on this, Witsit, right? If you consider, have you ever heard of the effects you can get if you're out in the ocean? You get just dead sea, dead, everything's dead. You're not moving, and if nothing changes, you could end up just dying on the boat there. So in
It's called the
conditions like
doldrums. It's called the doldrums.
in conditions like that, imagine if there wasn't any any precession or whatever the name you want to call for this etheric effect, if there was nothing at all, you'd get something that's potentially like a guaranteed destruction of that environment. But to me, I know I'm making an image for people to think about, and it's just the way I like to think about these things. But to me, it seems like one of the purposes for this slight change, this constant slight change, is to have environments like that not obviously affected, to change the fact that this is like, you know, insert scenario, here's the doldrums, but to have a like a cohesiveness with the rest of the system that it's going to change eventually, if that makes sense. It basically it's just like the least energy input environmental control you can think of.
Has anybody ever thought the preferred direction of light is due to the sun? And I wonder,
Well,
have
it's
they ever
affected.
done that at night?
It's affected by the sun. Yes, they did at night as well. Yeah.
What were the results at night? You know?
The same. It only changed based on time of year. So where the sun
Only the
was in its
time of
annual
year.
cycle. Yeah.
Okay.
Which is still based on the sun motion, right? Because it's annual motion.
Right. So it's sun-based.
Yeah, in terms of solar motion.
That would make sense. Magnetic, we know the sun causes the aurora. So yeah.
You're saying the sun where it is, between the tropics and the equator in its position, rather than where it is in its daily cycle, like the yearly, not daily.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, that's what the Dayton Miller experiment showed. It showed that the fringe shift measured was directly correlated to periodicity of the sun, where the sun was in its annual cycle. And specifically, I think that the maximum fringe shift fell on the autumn equinox, and then the minimum fell on the spring equinox.
That's interesting. That almost implies that like it's something to do with the magnetic field. In my mind, whether the sun's at the Tropic of Cancer or Tropic of Capricorn, if it's not due to like the fact that the sun, it's high noon or it's midnight kind of thing, if it's not due to that, then but it seems like it'd be great to do more testing though to know for sure. But
yeah. So this is a correlation causation situation, right? It's like,
which comes first, chicken or the egg?
The classic, like the sun's going to rise, but the rooster crows or whatever, because yeah, sure, it correlates to where the sun is, but the sun correlates to the overall cycle of the sky. Like it's this super intricate, majestic system that seemingly is manifested as a torus field. It's just in and out, has all these motions within it. So
based on the sun, and then. Oh, sorry, I thought you were done.
I guess what I'm saying is the sun doesn't have to be directly physically causing it, or certainly doesn't have to be the sole causal agent of it to still be correlated.
Well, yeah, we have solar wind, right? We have solar wind. We know that the sun charges batteries and so on and so forth, right? So, yeah, this is a cause and effect. Of course, it's not proof, right? But it's, yeah.
Well, yeah, seemingly is a cause. I guess, yeah. It's just kind of nuanced, man. Because it's like, think about this. Say the sun is not like electromagnetically affecting it at all, but it is moving through the ocean that is the ether that is vortexing. So it's basically leaving its trail behind, And does that ripple down and affect things? Is it actually just the motion in the medium that is affecting the light, as opposed to this direct electric interaction? And I think that makes perfect sense. That's exactly what I would expect, because the light is the medium. So however the medium is moving, that's how the light's going to move. So like if it's spinning in one direction, the light's going to be affected in that direction, or based on that direction. If it's rippling down to you, the light's going to be affected by that. So like basically it's this giant like celestial ocean, and if you're just throwing in these rocks or skipping rocks, or there's a boat that's doing a figure eight in it, right? Whatever's a few feet down in the ocean is going to be affected by that motion in the overall like celestial ocean.
I'd like to say something. No matter what position the sun is in, either physical or that, you know, how we perceive it, what angle the sun rays are coming in, what motion we measure through what medium else. The physical measurement of the surface of water, I think, is the key to a shape, right? Like, I don't know if you agree with that. Everything else would have to correlate with that, right?
Absolutely. I always say the Achilles heel of the globe is water. Absolutely, bar none.
But, you know, even if you measure this, that, and the other, that's not a physical object. Like, you're trying to measure angles to a sun that you don't even know what position it's in. It could be just an apparent position, or, you know, it could be the physical light could be somewhere else, and then it's shining through something, and you perceive it to be at this angle, which you predict what distance that would be from the surface of where you're at. Doesn't change the shape of the surface, right? Until you measure the shape, the surface, the physical surface, I don't think you can correlate anything.
Yeah, I'm just like so far beyond the globe is a lie. But like, what's so crazy about it is, really simply put, like, it seems like there's just water above us, and water seems to have many different modalities. So there's just water above us, and things are swimming and moving throughout the water, and then that ripples down and affects us here. And one more thing I want to say. One thing I want to say about this, the comment about the sun being apparent, made me think, like, is it really that unfathomable that maybe, just maybe, a creator that is far superior to any of us created a place for us to live? And he also created an immaculate light show that we get to experience based on wherever we are in the place he made for us to live. And we're just not supposed to know how it works, because that's like the whole point. It's like, look, I'm going to make something so incredible for them to see and look at. You know, like, it's so beyond
like a
what they
magic
can
show.
understand. It's like
you're so,
a magic show. Yeah.
Well,
you're so amazed. Like if you learned how the beans are made, it destroys some of the awe and astonishment. No, I totally get that.
Yeah, or like, even if you go to like a modern rave, and one more thing, if you go to like a modern rave, they'll have like a dancer, and it'll look like lasers are coming out of his hand, and he's ducking and diving these lasers, and they're cutting him in half and all this stuff. But none of that's actually what's happening, right? But it looks like that, and why would the creator not maybe just give us like some awesome entertainment?
Talk about the one where it looks like the guy grabs the laser beam mid-beam and like changes its direction.
No, that's awesome. Where the guy actually grabs the beam and he's like laser like
lightsabers.
Yeah.
Psalms 19:1. The lasers.
That's what I'm saying.
And the sky is my handiwork. You're not supposed to know that. Just enjoy it and know that I created it for you to enjoy. I give you the domain over the earth, which is the land.
Yeah.
And where you
Dude,
live.
it not only does not only does the whole Bible say it the whole time, and all the authors, all the prophets, they're like, oh man, you know, the creator's so awesome. Just look at the sky. We could never understand that. That's like the whole vibe. But it's not even just the Bible. It's like all the ancient civilizations actually view the sky that way.
Bro, just take the Interferometry mechanism, right? The ancients actually recreated the sky in the form of a gear system. So yeah, it's not far-fetched, creator. Not at all.
And they probably for sure viewed it like, this is us just primitively trying to mark down like where it's gonna be. Like, the idea of understanding exactly what it is and how it's all working is just a modern thing. It's like a modern thing. People think that they can figure out how that works down to the fairy stardust, 4,000 quadrillion miles away, and that something has a certain density made of chlorine or whatever.
Yeah,
I'm going before you, Canadian. I rule above you. I'm starting a thing. Creation proves creator. Ask me how campaign. That's going to be my future mission in life. I've been thinking about it for years. I've talked on it. I've gone to churches and talked about it. They've been real receptive. You hear on the news and on all the programs now that everything's a lie. Basically, people are. I think it's time, right? People are ready. Like a revolution almost, or whatever you want to call it. But I think it's a timely thing, and I think the time is now.
Oh yeah, this is definitely the time, bro, for sure.
Bro,
And
do it.
put the Antikythera mechanism in your quiver as proof of creation.